It all begins at the end of a great war where humanity finally came out victorious. They fought against the 6 great demon gods who wanted to wipe the world out completely. And in the end, they were all defeated, even the last one, the demon god of the ruined sea. However, the victory came at a high price, as a large part of the surface was swallowed by a sea of destruction. With that, humanity found itself on the brink of extinction, and one man curses his luck. Looking at the destruction around him, he wonders why victory feels so much like defeat. Besides there being almost no heroes left, the tower that protected the earth also crumbled. What was left of the world was just a sea of ruin and despair everywhere. He complains that the sea hasn't disappeared, but a voice interrupts him, saying he's throwing a tantrum all by himself. The one speaking is Sunga the Rabid Hound, who accuses him of wanting all the credit for himself. Then Louise Valent, the explosive hound, shows up and insults her colleague, saying he was just pretending to fight. Next, Amir Sin the Ice Hound joins the argument, complaining about his boss. At this moment, we find out the young man is Lee Si-hoon, the last blacksmith who helped them. His companions are shocked by our protagonist's bold response. The blacksmith doesn't back down and tells them all to shut it, calling them the 3 hounds. These 3 weren't on humanity's side, nor on the side of pandemonium, being completely neutral. They simply acted as they pleased and did only what they felt like. Their only goal was to seek their own gains, acting like true opportunists. But despite being selfish, they survived and were the ones who helped the most in the end. So, Lee Si-hoon wonders if the outcome would have been different if they had helped sooner. Tired, the blacksmith wonders if any of his companions will manage to survive. Sunga is the first to answer, saying it's over for him because his organs were crushed. Luz and Amir are also in a similar situation and know they won't last much longer. The protagonist then says they should have arrived to help much earlier. And as he complains that the 3 only looked out for themselves, one of his companions falls. Lee Si-hoon just watches in silence as the life leaves his colleague's eyes. Suddenly, a red energy strikes the 3 heroes who were still standing. Unable to react, the 3 of them fall to the ground, their fight now over, leaving only the blacksmith. He then laments, saying his friends were a pain in the neck until the very last second. With determination, our protagonist gets up, holding his blacksmith hammer. He then prepares to use his last bit of strength to honor his fallen comrades. The young man complains that they should have taken better care of the equipment he made. Next, the blacksmith places his friends' weapons on the ground to serve as gravestones. After paying his respects, he feels his own time is also approaching. Looking at the horizon, he wonders if it's his time to leave this world. He then says this will be the last time he'll do this before preparing to act. With a gesture, the young man activates a mysterious ability in his own chest. A system screen appears extracting the fate of the target named Lee Si-hoon. The system informs that the bond with the creator, Lee Si-hoon, is being extracted. This is his innate ability, the blacksmith of bonds, which creates ores from relationships. But when used on himself, the result is worse than common iron ore. He then holds the ore and wishes that if there's nothing in it, it will at least carry his regrets. With this thought, our protagonist feels immense pain and writhes on the ground. At that moment, he hears the sound of waves, wondering if it's the ruined sea or his imagination. But he's sure of one thing: whenever he hears this sound, he creates incredible items. With a strike of his hammer, a great light explodes from the ore, illuminating everything around. The result is a simple dagger, and he laments that even at the end, he couldn't create something special. The young man is frustrated with the result, finding the weapon too plain and ordinary. So he decides it's better to end everything with his own hands than to be taken by the waves. As he falls, he thinks he's a fool for his last action being to hammer something. And as he sinks in the water, he realizes the sound of the waves was actually the sound of his mana. Finally, the protagonist understands that the sound that always accompanied him was that of the ruined sea. He regrets not noticing it sooner or not convincing the 3 hounds to help. But his biggest regret was not using his hammer to help others earlier. Suddenly, a system screen appears, and the image of the equipment he created manifests. Then, the image ability Return to Origin is activated before his eyes. Confused, he hears someone call him Kate Lee Si-hoon and is startled by the old title. A young man then yells at him for being distracted during the admission exam. He remembers that 31 years ago, he was taking the Babel admission exam. However, he realizes that the image manifestation he saw before his end is there. He wonders if the regression came from the item he made, while the instructor gives a final warning. The man threatens to kick him out if he doesn't focus, and the young man agrees sheepishly. Our protagonist understands that he has truly gone back in time and now has a second chance. He then questions if he can change everything if he acts sooner this time. But he quickly dismisses that thought, saying it's not the most important thing right now. The only thing that matters is to seize the opportunity he has been given at this very moment. With a determined smile, he vows to himself that he will protect everything this time. He decides that in this life, he will enter Babel to start his new plan of action. And the first step will be to find the 3 hounds to change all of their destinies. Meanwhile, a man with white hair notices the way our protagonist works. The evaluator is surprised by what he sees and finds the candidate impressive. He praises the young man's rhythm, saying his resonance is clear and free of impurities. Lee Si-hoon's forging skills are top-notch, surprising the man. Everyone in the workshop remains focused on their own tests, not noticing what's happening. The instructor is shocked by the level of perfection of the sword the young man just created. The other man who scolded him earlier can't believe he managed to make that. The gray-haired evaluator thinks that an incredible candidate has enrolled this year. He is sure that if the young man hands in the sword now, he will pass the test on the spot. To everyone's surprise, Lee Si-hoon shatters the perfect sword to pieces on the anvil. The young man then says he still has a long way to go and can't submit this piece of junk. He adds that presenting such trash is something he would never accept as a blacksmith. With that, one of the instructors gets angry and yells at the young man for breaking the weapon in front of the professor. Ignoring the assistant, the young man asks the evaluator to redo his task, leaving him surprised. Assistant Han tries to reprimand the candidate, but the white-haired man stops him right away. The evaluator then tells the assistant to bring the remaining materials for our protagonist. The man asks if this is against the rules, or if he'll have to get the items himself. Flustered, Assistant Han shouts that it's not and runs to get the materials for the young blacksmith. Afterward, the evaluator turns to the young man and calls him, getting his attention. He reminds him that there are only 40 minutes left in the exam, and Lee Si-hoon confirms. The man then questions if he still believes that breaking the sword was the right choice. The protagonist maintains his serious and confident expression without saying a single word. With conviction, he states that he absolutely cannot turn in something like that. Satisfied with the answer, the evaluator smiles and tells the young man to do his best. The young man thinks that forging perfectly is difficult because he lacks mana, strength, and time. Even with all the difficulties, he ponders what the best option would be in this situation. Suddenly, another candidate is startled by a strange noise coming from the protagonist's forge. The assistant shouts desperately, saying he's putting mana into the ignition stone. Ignoring the warnings, our hero continues his work, focused on what he's doing. Another candidate in the workshop is shocked by the scene and calls the protagonist a madman. Then, a huge explosion of colorful energy lights up the entire forge workshop. Desperate, one of the candidates shouts for a fire extinguisher to put out the fire that started. But the professor stops him and says to leave it, as he shouldn't act like that. With that, the instructor tells his assistant to look closely at the flow of the flames. Lee Si-hoon then stands with his back to everyone as flames of various colors surround him. This technique is called 5-color fire forge and increases the furnace's temperature. Although it requires precise mana control, it's great because it uses little energy. Another candidate is surprised that the forge didn't explode with that amount of power. He then notices that the color of the iron ingot has completely changed because of the fire. The evaluator understands that he altered the iron's properties to speed up the process. This will shorten the forging time, but with 30 minutes remaining, it's still tight. The man then thinks that even though the previous forge was excellent, it wasn't enough. If the young man doesn't show something more, he won't be able to finish in time to pass the test. Ignoring the time pressure, our protagonist continues to hammer the metal with force. With a confident smile, he seems to have a plan in mind to finish the job. He then uses his finger to make a strange mark on the hot, glowing metal. Shortly after, our hero puts the ingot back into the furnace with the colored flames. Even while sweating and looking tired, the young man remains focused on his final goal. The young blacksmith goes to hammering the metal with impressive speed and precision. Suddenly, he feels a sharp pain in his hand and stops hammering for a second. He realizes his mana has run out and decides to start training his body after the exam. Even with his hands bleeding and his body weak, he doesn't give up on his final goal. Determined not to waste a second, he goes back to hammering the incandescent metal. With all his strength, the young man pushes his body to the limit to finish the sword in time. Time flies by, and the instructor announces that there are only 10 and then 3 minutes left. In the last available minute, he adds the finishing touches to the blade with incredible precision. The instructor then yells for all candidates to stop their work immediately. With a sigh of relief, our protagonist seems to have managed to finish just in time. He then clenches his fist tightly, feeling the satisfaction of having completed his goal. Suddenly, a system screen announces the completion of the fire sword and a new skill. The evaluation results shows that the sword is high rank, surprising everyone. The 5-color fire sword is a high-quality saber with magical properties. The other candidates are shocked to see that he managed to create a high-rank weapon. The young man then asks them to check the weapon's details, leaving the instructors stunned. Assistant Han can't contain himself and starts yelling that the young man passed the exam with flying colors. The professor scolds him for shouting, and the assistant apologizes sheepishly. Later, in Professor Kim and Cheol's office, the two meet for a conversation. The evaluator then observes our protagonist, who is sitting calmly on the sofa. In a serious tone, he asks if the sword the young man made was worth submitting. The young blacksmith confidently replies that for now, that sword was enough. With that, the professor realizes that even with the incredible result, the young man is still not satisfied. Being very direct, the professor says that this place isn't enough for him and advises him to withdraw his application. The man explains that although Babel has a great reputation, the forging department doesn't have significant results. Our protagonist listens in silence and thinks to himself that this is a fact he already knew. He knows that in 8 years, Babel's forging department will close, and the best academy of the future will be Vulcan. But the young man interrupts the professor and says he's wrong, because the best academy of the future won't be Vulcan. With a determined look, he states that the best will be Babel, simply because he is going to enroll there. The young man's declaration leaves the evaluator completely surprised by such confidence. The man then asks if he is confident enough to be the best, and the young man says yes, because there is no one better. At this, the evaluator asks if the young man knows the process for selecting the best freshman in the department at Babel. The young man explains that the top 2 from each course take an extra exam, and the best freshman is chosen from them. It is then explained that the Great Babel Academy divides its cadets into 3 major departments. These 3 are the combat support and the technical department where our hero is. In addition, each of these departments has dozens of courses that intertwine like the roots of a tree. The title of best freshman is given only to the supreme talent who is recognized by all of Babel. Hearing the explanation, the professor becomes thoughtful and clenches his fist tightly on his leg. The man then says he will speak once more, but not as his professor, but as a senior blacksmith. He warns that even if he is the best, he will struggle to succeed and advises him to go to Vulcan Academy. The evaluator finishes by saying that this is the best path for our protagonist's future. With a smile, Lee Si-hoon thinks that the professor is putting his future above his own position, finding him to be a decent guy. But the young man replies that the environment doesn't really matter, just as he himself just said. With a smile, the young man states that the Babel where he will enroll will soon become the best. The professor thinks that wherever the young man goes, he ends up becoming the best of all. He thinks the protagonist's statement goes beyond arrogance, bordering on presumption. Despite this, the man extends his hand and says he looks forward to working with him. Lee Si-hoon shakes his hand with a smile, and a level 1 bond is established between the two. Then his ability is activated to extract a bond from Professor Kim In-cheel. A blue energy envelopes his hand as he uses the power of the blacksmith of bonds. With this, the young man creates a special ore called high-quality fire-imbued iron. Back in his room, our protagonist analyzes the ore he just obtained from the professor. He thinks the item isn't bad but complains that the size of the ore is too small. The young man reflects on his bond extraction ability, which creates new ores. The problem is that the bond level is still too low to be used properly. On top of that, his stats are horrible compared to the other freshmen at Babel. Sighing, he thinks it's a shame, but if it's the price for returning to the past, he got off cheap. So, our hero decides not to rush, as waiting a little longer would just be greedy. With determination, the young man affirms that he still has time to destroy the scum of Pandemonium. Pandemonium is a force of monsters that threatens not only humanity but the entire planet. He decides that to stop them, he will not hesitate to use all necessary means at his disposal. The young man can't risk forgetting the future, so he needs a memory item. He thinks that the first step of enrolling in Babel is complete and wonders what's next. Suddenly, his eyes glow, and a blue system screen appears in front of him. It informs him that his bond level has risen to 1, and he has gained the bond engraving skill. A week later, our protagonist returns to the gates of the Grand Babel Academy. Walking through the corridors, he complains about being lost and wonders if this is the right place. Finally, the young man finds the door to Foundry Room number 3 and feels relieved. As he opens the door to say good morning, he is interrupted by someone calling him a cadet. Entering the room, he sees his professor and 2 other men who were already waiting for him. One of them then comments with disdain that our protagonist seems quite relaxed. This is Michael Barmavice, the vice director, who complains that everyone was waiting for the young man. Professor Kim defends him, saying there are still 10 minutes until the supplementary exam. Michael replies that the problem isn't the time, but a matter of the young man's attitude. At this, Lee Si-hoon realizes that the professor doesn't get along with his superiors either. He now understands why the man recommended he go to another academy to study. Meanwhile, the other candidate present in the room just watches the whole discussion in silence. The blonde-haired young man shoots a sharp glance in our hero's direction without saying anything. He continues to stand in the same spot, analyzing the protagonist with a serious expression. Suddenly, the blonde turns to greet him but stops mid-sentence confused. Our hero is confused and thinks he's seen that strange guy somewhere before. But a new person arrives and breaks the tension, asking if everyone is gathered. With that, everyone in the room turns their attention to the woman who just entered. The vice director greets the woman who just arrived, addressing her as the dean of the academy. With wide eyes, our protagonist is shocked because he recognizes that person immediately. In a dramatic scene, the woman sits in her chair while Lee Si-hoon is frozen in place. She then introduces herself as Ri Yunha, the dean of Borsippa, and apologizes for being late. In his thoughts, the young man desperately screams, wondering why on earth she is there. This woman is the S-rank hero Ri Yunha, the weapon eater, with a very unique skill. Before his regression to the past, she was a regular client who always traded with him. In a dark memory, he sees her badly injured, sitting alone in the middle of the rain. With a sad and regretful look, she says she regrets devouring his weapon. Our protagonist then stands in front of her, not knowing what to say at that moment. With a face full of pain, tears stream down as the rain continues to fall on her. The young blacksmith also has an expression of suffering as he sees his friend in that state. The scene shows a complete desolation of the moment, with the 2 of them standing amidst the destruction. Back in the present, someone calls his name, pulling him out of his memories of the past. The young man then shakes his head and answers yes to the person who called his attention. The dean then says she will explain the exam and asks them both to pay close attention. Professor Kim adds that the total test time will be 90 minutes. The vice director says they must create an item that can be used with the previous sword. But the professor clenches his fist tightly and says there is a special condition for the test. He then creates a fireball and reveals that they can only use alchemy smelting. The professor then points to a table full of items for their supplementary exam. He explains that both candidates are free to use any of the provided ores. Furthermore, the dean and the vice director will be responsible for judging the equipment. The man then encourages them to produce a result they won't be ashamed of. With that, he gives the order, and the exam finally begins for the two young blacksmiths. Our protagonist then ties his apron while thinking about the alchemy smelting technique. He knows the technique uses pure mana, but the blonde taunts him, asking if he's just going to watch. Surprised by his rival's attitude, our hero turns around, not understanding what he said. Lee Si-hoon asks if the other guy was talking to him, and the young man replies that there's no one else there. At that moment, the professor reprimands the blonde young man, calling his attention by his name, Hans Barmut. The man then orders the young man to avoid making comments that are not related to the exam. Hans apologizes, and our protagonist notices the last name, wondering if he is the judge's son. It finally clicks, and he understands why the two look so much alike. The blonde young man realizes his opponent has figured it all out and says the situation is ridiculous. With a look of superiority, he confirms that he is indeed the vice director's son. He then compares himself to Lee Si-hoon, bragging about his family and his superior mana. With an air of contempt, the blonde-haired young man begins to choose his materials for the test. He then holds a blue ore and declares that the result of the exam is already decided. The judges note that he chose lazulite and hainamok, which are materials with high mana content. Worried, Professor Kim thinks that water mana is sensitive to fire, making it difficult to smelt. But the vice director says that's a thing of the past and alchemy methods are different now. The professor then explains that even so, the smelting time can vary, taking about 30 minutes. With a confident smile, the vice director seems to know exactly what he's doing. He then brags that his son Hans can synthesize any ore in 30 minutes. Hans begins to use his ability, and the professor is shocked by the resonant synthesis in such a short time. This technique is on a level that not even the second-year students can compete with. Suddenly, Professor Kim understands everything. The short time and the method were handpicked. He then realizes the exam was designed to favor Hans and curses Michael in his thoughts. Meanwhile, the dean observes our protagonist and believes his choice will work. Lee Si-hoon then shows the two materials he chose for his alchemy exam. The three judges are surprised and wonder if those are hydrate and wahong sick. The vice director scoffs, saying he has a lot of pride but doesn't know his own abilities. On the other side of the room, young Hans just watches the scene with a look of utter contempt. He then wonders if his rival chose ores just to show off for him. The young man calls the protagonist a fool, because with his mana level, he won't be able to control wahong sick. With a smug smile, young Barmut believes that victory will be easier than he thought. But suddenly, his expression changes completely when he sees an orange light coming from our hero. A system screen appears, and the young man's bond engraving ability is activated. The bond engraving harmony is activated and can be equipped on the user's arms. He then equips the iron of harmony on his right arm, which glows with fire energy. With a smile, the protagonist's arm is completely covered in impressive flames. Hans then gets irritated by the scene and curses his rival for using his useless tricks. But our hero shows that his power is no trick and masterfully manipulates the fire. He then makes the ores float in the air, enveloped by his fire energy. The three ores then begin to spin in the air as they are smelted by the flames. With a victorious smile, Lee Si-hoon seems to be in complete control of the situation. The dean and the judges watch the two young men working with their elemental magic. The vice director thinks the young man is foolish, as the basic rule is to use pure mana in resonance. He believes that by forcing the attribute's mana, it will go out of control and blow everything up. With a malicious smile, the man eagerly awaits the accident he thinks will happen. However, to everyone's surprise, our protagonist controls the flames with total perfection. Meanwhile, his opponent Hans remains focused on his own slow alchemy process. The vice director and the others are shocked by the enormous firepower the young man demonstrates. The fire energy then condenses and transforms into a new piece of equipment for the hero. The system announces that the process is complete and the Huajiaochuo armament has been finished. The three judges are left speechless by the impressive result they just witnessed. The vice director can't believe what he's seeing and questions how he managed such a feat. The item is a rare-grade fire sheath with a powerful wildfire ability. Hans, who is still in the middle of his work, is shocked that his rival finished so quickly. He finds it impossible, as he knows that using attribute mana normally causes a total loss of control. Hans then wonders if he was wrong all along as he tries to control his alchemy. Suddenly, he realizes something has gone very wrong with his ore fusion process. His father desperately yells at him to stop, as using attribute mana is very dangerous. But it was too late, and young Barmut is engulfed by completely out of control blue energy. The mana intensifies more and more, and the young man can do nothing to prevent the explosion. With the sound of shattering glass, the ore in his hands breaks into many pieces. Then a huge explosion of water mana engulfs the entire exam room. Later, in the metallurgy department, the whole situation is discussed by those in charge. The floor of the room was completely covered with the shards of the exploded ore. The blonde young man just stares at the floor with an expression of total defeat on his face. Our protagonist observes everything in silence as it's said that one of the two would be recommended. With his hand on his head, Professor Kim laments what happened, as the situation has become complicated. He then says it's a shame, because under other circumstances, one of them would have been the top freshman. Kneeling on the floor, Hans Barmut holds his arm, which was injured by the man explosion. His hand trembles in pain as he realizes he lost without even putting up a real fight. In another room, the vice director suggests the test be invalidated because of the accident, but the professor refuses and says it was all the fault of young Hans Barmett's carelessness. With a smile, Michael taunts him, asking if he values results more than the students. The vice director stands up and states that the situation was strange from the very beginning. He then explains that the fastest resonance speed at the academy is 5 minutes. He then asks if it makes sense for a rookie to achieve resonance at the same time he activates his mana. Our protagonist just listens quietly with an expression of total indifference on his face. He then explains that alchemy smelting doesn't suppress the ore with the blacksmith's will, but rather its goal is to find the root of the ore's nature and awaken its life. The young blacksmith says that what he did was precisely the essence of alchemy smelting. He thinks this method will become standard in a few years, so there's no need to hide it. But he's not going to explain it to the old man who only knows how to give orders, and the vice director understands nothing. With a contemptuous smile, the older man directly accuses him of cheating on the exam. He scoffs, saying that a nameless rookie would never make a rare, grade weapon without tricks. Angered by the accusation, our hero asks what he just said to him. Suddenly, the dean interrupts the argument, saying that this whole thing was ridiculous. The vice director agrees and asks to disqualify the young man and hold a new test. But to his surprise, the woman completely ignores him and walks right past him. She then walks to the table, and the professor is startled to see that she is going to pick up the item. Without hesitation, the dean picks up the fire sheath that our protagonist created in the exam. With the weapon in her hands, she says with a serious expression that this is all absurd. Suddenly, a drop of saliva drips from her mouth as she stares at the item with desire. Then, the woman points at the young man and calls his name, to everyone's surprise. With her eyes shining, she asks for a bite, or at least a lick of his weapon. The professor and the vice director are completely speechless at the dean's bizarre request. A comical illustration shows just how bizarre and awkward the situation became for everyone. That same afternoon in the city center, our protagonist reflects on the recent events. He walks calmly through the academy's corridors, thinking about everything that happened. The young man then analyzes the sheath and thinks that the quality isn't bad, but the adjustments are rough. But he puts that aside, because he has something much more important on his mind right now. With a smile, he remembers the vice director's face, and people around him find him strange. Suddenly, he stops walking and realizes that the name Barmet sounds very familiar to him. The young man then starts to rack his memory, trying to remember where he heard that name. With that, a memory of the future emerges where Luz complains about armor that exploded. She shows the scar on her face and blames the blacksmith who made the defective equipment. At that time, our protagonist just listened to his friend's story very attentively. He then finally remembers that the scoundrel who injured Luz was named Hans Barmet. He thinks that his first goal was to contact the 3 hounds and straighten them out right away. But with a smile, he realizes he no longer needs to rush to solve this problem. If Hans never loses control, there will be no reason for the incident with his friend to occur. Meanwhile, in the faculty meeting room, a major decision is announced. One of the professors from another department asks if the decision to appoint the young man is serious. With a sharp look, the academy's dean asks if he has any objection to it. The man replies that it's not an objection, but rather advice since she's new to the position. The vice director then comments that the dean hasn't been in the position for long and is knave. The red-haired woman just listens to the complaints in silence with a serious look. Another man agrees that the weapon is impressive, but that the decision needs to be reconsidered. But the professor defends him, saying they haven't seen the fire blade and its synergy. One of those present in the room reads the reports and questions if that is really enough. The dean then says that the weapon isn't even 60% of what the young man can do. With a slight smile on her face, she prepares to give her final word on the matter. She says that if they don't accept her decision even after the cadets' demonstration, then she will resign from her position as head of the department, leaving everyone shocked. The scene changes and it's explained that the Tower of Heroes appeared 54 years ago. With it, a horde of demons also appeared, and a great disaster began in the world. In this scenario, Babel Academy was created to train new heroes to fight against evil. In a ceremony, a man says that Babel has trained many heroes, and they will be the next. He then encourages the new students to march forward, as this is everyone's duty. Our protagonist listens to the speech while staring at the man who appears to be the director. This is Ludwig Schubert, the Emperor of Ascension, and a very important figure at Babel. The young man thinks he seems like a decent guy, but isn't the saint he appears to be. Next, a man announces the demonstration of the year's top cadets will begin. The best from each college are called, and our hero and Hans walk to the stage. Lee Si-hoon reflects that in his past life, many arrogant people came out of that academy. With his sword in hand, he prepares for the start of his skills demonstration. With a smile, he thinks that now he finally understands the reason for so much arrogance. The announcer then declares that the item for the demonstration is ready to appear. Suddenly, a robot with a menacing look appears in the middle of the large battle arena. This is the Ottoman Golem Model 9 with a power level of a C-rank hero. Lee Si-hoon notices that the robot has no weapons and wonders if it's a fighter type. The man then announces that the first to fight will be from the combat college, and the one chosen for the first demonstration of power is the young cadet Jake Myers. The arena is huge, and the young man stands in the center preparing to fight against 3 robots. Our protagonist recognizes the young man and remembers that he is the third son of the Myers family. The blonde young man then prepares for the fight and gets into his initial combat stance. The robot stares back at him with its red eyes and prepares to attack at any moment. With the announcer's authorization, the great battle finally begins. Without wasting time, the automaton charges straight at the young man for the first blow. But with a quick move, the young man manages to dodge the attack with great ease. The robots attack together, but he continues to skillfully dodge all their blows. The young man slides across the arena floor to escape another powerful attack from the robot. With a confident smile, he says that now it's his turn to attack and show his power. He then leaps with all his might towards the automaton for a devastating counter-attack. With his fist clenched, the young man prepares to deliver a punch with all his strength. And with a single blow, he hits the robot dead on, sending it flying with the impact. The other students in the audience are impressed with what they just witnessed. With his fist glowing, the young man shows that he's not messing around with the robots. Our protagonist is shocked because he remembers that he passed away as an A rank in his early 20s. With so much skill, he is considered a talent that appears only once a decade at Babel. The young man then wonders why, with so much talent, he didn't surpass A rank in his past life. With his eyes glowing gold, the young man prepares to finish the fight once and for all. With a powerful spinning kick, he says it's over and shatters the last robot to pieces. The energy from his blow is so strong that it creates a vortex that sucks in the automaton's remains. All that's left of the golem is its completely destroyed head on the arena floor. With a satisfied smile, the young man says it's been a while since he really stretched. The announcer is left speechless by the scene and can't believe what he just saw. He praises the young man's incredible demonstration, having defeated a C-rank robot in an instant. As expected from the top cadet, he waves to the audience, who shout his name with euphoria. Our protagonist thinks that he really stirred up the crowd, and the next one will feel the pressure. Next, the top cadet from the Air Support College is called for her demonstration. He recognizes her and thinks he doesn't need to worry about pressure when it comes to her. Erika is from the Inno family and became an S-rank hero with mythic-grade weaponry. But in the end, she became a demon and was purged at the hands of her own family. The young man thinks she is destined to be corrupted and there is no benefit in getting close. Suddenly, the young woman turns in his direction and stares at him, leaving our protagonist confused. He is completely bewildered and wonders why she just looked at him like that. It is then announced that the automaton for the demonstration is a special model with extra armor. This robot has 1.5 times more defense, and everyone wants to see what the girl will do. Erika then shows a cage with a crow inside, its eyes glowing blue. Her eyes glow in the same color as a dark energy emerges around her. With a gesture, the young woman releases the bird from the cage, and it spreads its wings to fly freely. The crow then flies towards the giant robot while letting out a loud caw. Our protagonist wonders if that is really just any ordinary crow flying. The automaton perceives the threat and stares at the bird flying high in the grand arena's sky. At this, the robot raises its arms and enters a full defensive stance to protect itself. Lee Si-hoon thinks it will be difficult to pierce the armor since it's a defensive type. With a serious expression, the young woman seems to give a command for her summon to act quickly. Suddenly, the crow begins to transform into an armored, humanoid creature. The new being has an intimidating look with metallic armor and glowing eyes. The transformation completes, and a winged warrior emerges, floating with immense power. Without wasting time, the creature dives headfirst into a cloud of feathers and dark energy. With a spinning attack, the summon hits the robot dead on with incredible force. Our hero is completely shocked and speechless at the power he just witnessed. The automaton's chest glows intensely as its armor begins to shatter. With a large hole in its chest, the robot is completely destroyed and unresponsive. The robot sputters with sparks as the summon vanishes into thin air as if it never existed. Back in its crow form with blue flames, the creature lands calmly on the girl's finger. The audience goes wild with the incredible demonstration and praises the young cadet's strength. Jake Myers gets annoyed because he knows his performance will seem boring compared to hers. Finally, the top cadet from the technology college, our protagonist, is announced. Supervisor Ludwig Schubert watches attentively as the young man's name is called. He thinks the new freshmen are very skilled and wonders about the pressure on the young man. At this, Supervisor Ryunha simply says with confidence that he will be fine. The audience gets excited and wonders if he can surpass the previous demonstrations. With a swift movement, our hero draws his sword from its sheath and prepares to fight. Wielding his weapon, he faces the arena with a serious and determined look. System screens show the details of his two items, the blade and the fire sheath. Two students in the audience are amazed, as it's incredible for a rookie to get a rare rank weapon. But others find the demonstration weak, and the vice director smiles, thinking the heavens are on his side. With a wicked smile, he thinks that with this, the position of head of the college will finally be his. Dean Ryunha just watches everything with a serious and not so happy expression on her face. The announcer says they will use Model 10, but our hero interrupts him with a resounding no. He then asks them to equip Model number 8 with extra defense gear. The announcer is completely confused and wonders what he just heard from the young man. He thinks that Model 8 can already handle B-rank heroes, and yet the young man wants more defense. The announcer thinks that sudden requests are difficult and wonders if the young man wants to sabotage the demonstration. But suddenly, Professor Kim appears in the arena and says he brought what the young man requested. He then reveals the automaton with defensive equipment, and the announcer is shocked by the speed. The professor steps away from the robot as our hero prepares for the start of the fight. The white-haired man stares at his student from the other side of the arena without saying a single word. With a confident smile, he seems to believe in the potential of his newest student. He then encourages the young man to do his best and simply take down the robot in front of him. The announcer says he doesn't understand anything anymore but still gives the signal for the fight to begin. With a shout to start, our protagonist's grand demonstration can finally begin. Professor Kim then crosses his arms and watches everything with a very serious expression on his face. Dean Ryunha also pays close attention to what will happen with a stern look on her face. At this, Jake Myers becomes curious to see what will happen and also encourages him to fight. With a smile, Lee Si-hoon wonders if he will be able to meet expectations and prepares to act. Then, flames of 5 different colors explode from the hilt of his sword with great power. The young man then faces the giant robot as his sword is enveloped in an aura of fire. In the audience, Jake gets excited by the scene and finds it all very insane and impressive. But Hans Barmut scoffs, saying it's just a light show and has no real power. He wonders what a man with no mana can do as Lee Si-hoon manipulates the flames. It is explained that the blade's flames have conflicting properties and can harm the user, but he uses the sheath to force the flames into the weapon, turning them red. With his eyes glowing with fire, he says that the energy storage is complete. The automaton then perceives the threat and activates an energy shield to protect itself. Our hero unleashes the wildfire ability with a wave of red energy. The skill detonates the compressed mana, and his colleagues are shocked by so much power. Upon activating wildfire, the flames of 5 colors are released all at once. With a single blow, the energy explodes with absurdly destructive force. The men in the audience are completely speechless at what they just witnessed. The announcer is frightened and wonders what's wrong with that madman. When the smoke clears, the young man is standing alone amidst the destruction of the arena. With a slow and precise movement, he sheathes his sword back into its fire sheath. A sigh of relief escapes as a drop of sweat trickles down his face. Looking at the crater in the ground, he wonders if he overdid it a bit with the force. The announcer is trembling, not knowing what to say after that demonstration. He then shouts for maintenance and concludes the evaluation of the year's top cadets. Later, the dean enters the room and the young man apologizes for being late. But the young man apologizes for the mess he made in the auditorium during his fight. She says he should have controlled it better, and the young man wonders what she wants. Our protagonist then asks if she called him there just to give him a lecture. The woman denies it and says the reason she called him there was completely different. With nervous gestures, she approaches the young man to explain the real reason for the conversation. With a stern look on his face, he is completely confused about what is happening there. The dean then clears her throat a bit embarrassed and tries to continue the conversation. She offers to pay 10 times the market price, leaving the young man surprised by the offer. The woman then asks if he would be willing to sell his equipment to her. Our protagonist is shocked by the request and asks if he heard her correctly. Suddenly, a system screen announces that a bond has been formed with Dean Ryunha. She praises the equipment, and the system confirms that a level 1 bond has been established. Lee Si-hoon is surprised because before his regression, it took much longer for this to happen. With a smile, he gives thanks and thinks that either way, this is a great opportunity. He then puts his hands together and activates his bond extraction ability with blue energy. The screen shows the extraction of the woman's bond while the two stand still in the room. The result is gluttonous iron, a high-quality item that consumes other metals. Holding the red ore, he says that the extraction process is complete. She asks if he is going to sell, and the young man says no, leaving the woman confused. The dean doesn't understand, but the conversation is interrupted by Professor Kim, who knocks on the door. The man enters and announces that the director wants to start the presentation ceremony immediately. He then asks if he can take Cadet Lee Si-hoon to the ceremony that is about to begin. With a slightly disappointed look, the red-haired woman says she understands the situation. Our hero says goodbye, telling her he'll see her later, and leaves the room with his professor. Alone in the room, the dean stands motionless as her stomach rumbles loudly. The scene changes to the heart of Babel Academy, the old, detailed Marduk mansion. Walking down a luxurious corridor, the professor accompanies our protagonist to his destination. The man warns him to behave, as the director ignored the destruction of the auditorium. Standing in front of a giant door, he says the director is on a different level from them. With a smirk, the young blacksmith replies that he doesn't need to worry about anything. Upon entering, a voice greets him and asks if he is indeed Cadet Lee Si-hoon. This is Ludwig, the Emperor of Ascension and the great director of Babel Academy. Before the regression, he was the hero who destroyed one of the 6 great demon gods. Our protagonist thinks that as expected of an ascendant, he is truly incredible. The director then says that the equipment he showed in the demonstration was quite interesting, but he says it was lacking, and the young man gets annoyed with the older man's comment. In his thoughts, the young man is so angry he feels like throwing the sword away. As a tribute to his talent, the director decides to grant him 2 special rewards. Surprised by the offer, he thinks he can ask for 2 things and prepares to speak. Without hesitation, the young man asks for rewards that increase his mana and also his memory. With a gesture, the director uses his golden energy to materialize the requested items. A golden crest appears, shining intensely as its power manifests. The items are the heavy inkstone and the dream ivory, both of hero grade. Shocked, the young man thinks that while the stone is rare, the ivory is almost impossible to find. With a smile, he reflects that it will be difficult to use, but he already has a good idea in mind. The director asks the young man if he liked the rewards he just received as a gift. With a confident smile, our protagonist replies that the items are perfect for him. Outside, a mysterious voice questions the director about what he is thinking. The voice then complains that giving 2 rewards at once is not his style. Smoking his pipe, the man says he gave the items because the young man has the capacity for them. Ludwig says the young man has enough depth to seem like an old soul. With a glint in his eye, he adds that there is something more to that young blacksmith. He finishes his thought by saying that not even he can measure the young man's depth. The scene then changes to the outside, showing the large building of Babel Academy. In the classroom, our hero enters, and one of his new classmates greets him from afar. A student asks Hans where he wants to have lunch, but the blonde says he has plans with a senior. His friend is shocked to learn that he is going to meet the top third-year student. With an air of superiority, the young man brags about his connection with the upperclassmen to his friends. The classmate asks if he can come along but stops talking when he sees our hero at the door. With his eyes glowing gold, Lee Si-hoon stares at the group with a serious expression. An awkward silence fills the room, and no one dares to say a word. Our protagonist then focuses his intimidating gaze on his rival, Hans Barmut. Annoyed, the blonde young man stands up and asks what the heck is wrong with that look. With a smile, the young blacksmith says it seems his rival finally knows his place. Hans clenches his fist in anger for being humiliated by a nameless guy like our hero. Suddenly, the classroom door opens and a new man enters, telling everyone to sit down. This is the professor in charge of the class, and he says that since everyone has arrived, the class will begin. The man then explains that since it's the first class, they will start with introductions. With that, the master reveals the item in the box, which are the projection alloys for the test. He then picks up one of the ores and explains that they are dozens of times more sensitive to mana. By injecting mana into it, the weapon you imagine in your mind is created with great ease. Our protagonist is impressed because he knows the man is not one of the top 100 artisans for nothing. But with an analytical eye, he notices that there is something wrong with the weapon he created. The young blacksmith feels that the binding stone of that sword has a very serious problem. The professor then explains that because of its sensitivity, it's difficult to use the item as a real weapon. Therefore, the created weapon is called an alter ego and will serve as their self-introduction. The man warns that the weapons will be displayed for a week, and everyone must do their best. One of the students is shocked by the item's cost and thinks Babel's introductions are grand. Hans Barmut then shows his power and creates a golden sword with a very bright energy. Our hero watches everything with boredom and thinks there is no one with real talent there. Next, the professor finally calls Lee Si-hoon's name for his presentation. He thinks that since he is already the top student, there is no reason to hide his true power. Since he's going to do it anyway, the young man decides to go all out and show his power. With a determined look, he prepares to show everyone what he can really do. Then a blue energy explodes and a weapon with a unique shape is created in his hand. In the main hall, a crowd forms and a student comments that Lee Si-hoon's weapon is there. 2 students mock, saying it's funny they say he's on another level when he's just a rookie. His classmate agrees with the taunt, and the 2 continue to look at the weapons displayed in the room. A sign explains that the weapon absorbed 19 alloys, but the school decided to display it anyway. Other students think it was just a coincidence or that the school wants to promote him as a genius. But a black-haired girl appears and says with a serious look that she thinks a little differently. Then a blonde young man joins her and agrees with what the young woman just said to the others. He explains that even with so much projection alloy, it still wasn't enough to express our hero. The scene changes to the forge workshop, where we see our protagonist training hard. With a surprised expression, the young blacksmith seems to have realized something during his work. An instructor comments that there wasn't even a 1/100th of a second margin of error in his work. Another man then wonders what he should teach a boy with so much talent. With a smile, he simply decides to skip the young man and continue the class with the other students. After class, our protagonist remains in the workshop, organizing his forging tools. Even sweating and looking tired, the young man continues his training with great determination. He then stops for a moment and analyzes the blades he just created on his workbench. The instructor then appears and asks if he's going to break the swords again like last time. Our hero turns around surprised and faces his instructor, who is watching him from afar in silence. The man asks him not to break them, as they need to be turned in after class, and the young man is startled by this. The master explains that the academy supports them based on the performance of weapon sales to the outside. The instructor then asks what exactly he is dissatisfied with, his body or his mana. With a smile, our protagonist replies that at the moment the problem is his own body. He complains that to make training tools, he needs to smelt a heavy ore but doesn't have the strength. The master then thinks of a solution to help the young man with his stamina problem. He then suggests that getting buffs would be much faster than doing physical training. With a smile, the young man thinks that he never considered this method because he avoided it before returning. But now that he's back in the past and has no strength, getting a buff would help him smelt the ore. Grateful, the young man bows to the master and thanks him for the advice he just received. Our protagonist then notices something and says that when forging, the instructor is doing something wrong. He advises him to reduce the mana by 70% and focus the blows on a single point. With an air of confidence, the young man says that for now, this would be the best way to work. The instructor is completely shocked and wonders if a rookie just gave him advice. Without saying anything, the man stares at his hammer and seems to reflect on the young man's words. The scene then changes to a clear blue sky, showing that a new day has begun at the academy. It is explained that Babel encourages autonomous learning, and students can take classes in other colleges. Our hero then takes a train while it's said that if he accumulates 3 bad grades, he's expelled. The train continues on its way, and it is explained that students are free but responsible for their choices. The next station is the ore department, and the young man prepares to get off the stopped train. As he gets off, he comes face to face with Erica, the girl from the demonstration, who stares at him with a serious look. One of her colleagues then points at the young man and tells him to get out of the way very rudely. Confused by the group's attitude, the young man thinks they should be the ones to get out of the way. Her colleague gets annoyed, but our hero isn't intimidated and stares back at them coldly. With her arms crossed, Erica then asks the young man where he is going now. He explains that he is going to the enchantment department, and her colleague is surprised by the answer. The young woman then offers to guide him, leaving her companion completely shocked by her attitude. The young man tries to stop her, reminding her of a meeting, but she ignores him and tells him to go alone. Desperate, her colleague says that the upperclassmen really wanted her to go to the meeting, but with a cold look, the girl simply says she's not interested and dismisses him. Our protagonist just observes the entire interaction in silence, not understanding what is happening. Then, the two start walking side by side while her colleagues are left behind. Curious, the young woman asks what kind of minor he is looking for in the department. To this, he replies that he is trying to learn about buffs, and she questions what kind of buff. The two continue walking as he explains that he needs one that improves his physical abilities. She then suggests barrier magic, and the young man questions if it isn't just for defense. With a smile, the girl explains that it can vary depending on how you use the ability. She then uses her magic and energy chains appear around her with great power. The young woman then hands him an envelope and challenges him to try to tear it with his hands. He tries to tear the item but realizes it has become very resistant and is amazed by the strength. The young man understands that the envelope maintains its properties but hardens when force is applied. Satisfied, she says it's a technique that fits well with smelting and advises him. He finds the formula familiar, and Erica offers to introduce him to the professor, who is her relative. But the young man interrupts her right away, saying that he already understands how it all works. With the envelope dissolving in his hands, the young woman is completely shocked by the scene. She can't believe that in such a short time, he understood and broke her family's barrier magic. With a smile, he thanks her for the tip and says that barrier magic isn't so bad after all. He then says goodbye and advises her to go eat with the guys who are following her from a distance. Her colleagues then run over worriedly and ask if she's okay after all that. On the ground, the remains of an invitation to the elite group noblesse are scattered. The girl reveals that this is what she wanted to give him and asks him to wait a bit. The scene then changes and shows the large building of the Ore Academy's enchantment department. Inside the classroom, everyone is talking about Erica walking with someone from another college. He finds the rumors funny and thinks that if she liked him, a bond would have already been formed. The young man then remembers that to enroll in the class, he first needs to pass a test. Arriving at the test location, the young woman leads him into a forest, leaving him very confused about the situation. At this, another student complains that he can't find what he's looking for at all. Our protagonist then wonders if the test is some kind of hidden treasure hunt. Finding it all a drag, the young man and the girl continue walking through the forest in silence. Suddenly, he stumps his foot hard on the ground, suspecting that something has been hidden in a barrier. With that, the barrier shatters and reveals 2 men who stare at him, completely surprised. Shocked by the scene, one of the men stutters and says that our protagonist passed the test. Confused by the situation, our hero doesn't understand anything and asks for permission to speak. In his office, Professor Robert Perry comments that the young woman showed interest in the cadet from Borsippa. His assistant then shows him something on his phone for the professor to take a look at. The man understands why she enrolled in a beginner's course upon seeing the photo of the two. With that, the number of applicants has tripled, but the professor complains that he can't be happy. He thinks that since he received a request from the Ino Harris, he will do something different this year. This year, he will add a test using the dangerous labyrinth of dazzlement. This is a barrier that distorts the senses and forces a person to wander aimlessly in the area. Although it's a basic barrier, if the person knows nothing about enchantments, they won't even notice it. The man then wonders how the young man managed to get through the labyrinth without any help. He can't believe the young man broke the labyrinth using only his own instincts. With that, he announces to the group that they have all successfully passed the first test. Next, a red-haired young man offers to be the first in the second test. With a smile, he thinks this is his big chance to get young Erica's attention. The professor then explains that they must dismantle a magic circle while it is active. The young man then touches the spiderweb-shaped barrier that has a spider as its core. The spider flees when it senses mana in the web, and as long as it exists, the web will regenerate. He then complains, wondering if his mana isn't enough to surround the entire formula. In that case, the young man decides he will overwhelm the spider with his speed and power. The professor then announces a time of 2 minutes and 23 seconds and advises him to study. The red-haired young man thanks him sheepishly for the comment, while looking very frustrated with the result. One after another, the students try to break the magic circle, but they all end up failing. Seeing the general failure, the professor warns that because of this, they will all start in the beginner's class. He then calls for the next student, who is young Erika Inu, for her attempt at the test. With a serious and focused look, the girl prepares to show her skills to everyone present. A mana projection of the young woman appears over the spider web as she concentrates fully. Suddenly, the spider shatters, and the other students are amazed by her speed. With a confident smile, she shows why she is considered one of the best cadets in the academy. The master says her time was 22 seconds but could have been even faster. Finally, the professor calls for Lee Si-hoon, who will be the last to take the magic circle test. Our hero approaches, and one of the students thinks he doesn't seem like anything special at first glance. But to everyone's surprise, the young man crouches down to analyze the magic circle up close. The other students are confused and wonder why he hasn't started the actual test yet. With an analytical eye, the young blacksmith realizes that this barrier is similar to a heavy ore. He understands that the barrier restores itself if not hit with balanced stimuli. The professor also watches from a distance and wonders what on earth his student is doing crouched down. However, Erika interrupts him and asks him to leave our protagonist alone for now. With that, the man closes his eyes and seems to agree to wait and see what will happen. The young man then touches the web and thinks he can trap all the stimuli inside the ore. With a fire strike, he hits the web's core, destroying it in a large explosion of energy. Our protagonist remains kneeling on the ground while everyone else just watches the scene. With a punch to the ground, he confidently announces that his work with the magic circle is done. He thinks that with this, he can simply forge the equation to dismantle the barrier's formula. Next, the young man stands up with a victorious expression and faces all the other students. The assistant then announces that the total time was 7 minutes and 45 seconds. But the master thinks that time doesn't matter because next time, he will break the barrier in seconds. He understands that the young man not only undid the barrier but created a new equation for the formula. With an impressed look, young Erika seems to have become very interested in our hero. She gets goosebumps just imagining what creations he will forge if he combines his blacksmithing skills. Later, an email is sent to the college about a request from the young man for intermediate forging. The assistant who sent the email then wonders how many professors will show up this time. Immediately, several notifications from professors interested in supervising arrive on his phone. He notices that no one from the vice director's group has signed up, as they must be angry with the young man. With so many applicants, the man prepares to choose one of the professors for supervision. But suddenly a new message arrives and leaves the assistant in a complete state of shock. The message announces that the academy's dean herself will supervise the young man's forging session. In the forge workshop, the dean greets him, and the young man is startled by her presence there. The red-haired woman says she came to see his skills with her own eyes. With a smile, our hero replies that in that case, he will have to do his best. It is explained that the first step to forging the heavy rock is to understand how to handle the material. But the most difficult process of all is known as the mysterious VO process. In it, you place the heavy rock in a dark space until it turns into a liquid. Then the impurities are separated using only mana, and with that, the purity increases greatly. Although it seems easy, our hero knows that the process is basically restructuring matter. The dean just watches everything in silence with an expression of total concentration on her face. The young man then wonders if 25% is the most he can do right now. He thinks that if he reduces the ore any further, it won't be powerful enough for what he wants. With that, the young man prepares to start the second step of the complicated forging process. A red and very powerful energy begins to completely envelop our hero's hand. Then the protagonist masterfully manipulates a large amount of flames. With the red flames, he manages to filter the perfect sparks for his work. This stabilized flame is called Hoya's flame and maintains the temperature of his creation. The third step is to hammer the rock nonstop until all distortions are smoothed out. The dean thinks that even with fire resistance, he can still feel all the pain. She then wonders how much the young man has pushed himself until now to reach this level of power. The hours pass, and the sun begins to set while the work continues at full steam in the workshop. Already tired of waiting so long, the academy's dean ends up letting out a long, lazy yawn. Night finally falls, and the woman continues to watch the young man without leaving his side for a second. After 4 hours of intense work, he continues to hammer the ore without any rest. After absorbing the flames to the limit, the heavy rock finally begins to transform. Finally, the distortion stops and a black ooze is from the completed ore. Next, the young man melts the processed rock for the next stage of his work. He then pours the liquid into the mold, and the dean is shocked that he's using casting and not forging. The red-haired woman continues to watch, not understanding what he is thinking. In the fourth step, he uses a barrier-breaking formula to build a mana circuit. With this, a great power is released and an energy circuit forms inside the mold. The system announces that the obsidian prayer beads have been completed with a legendary technique. In addition, a new system screen appears and announces that he has learned a new skill. The young blacksmith then looks at the result of his work amidst the shards of the mold. The item is a rare bracelet that absorbs the user's mana and allows them to use the explosion skill. With a satisfied smile on his face, our protagonist celebrates that he succeeded in the end. Suddenly, a strange noise catches his attention, and the dean seems to be feeling unwell. With her face red and sweating, she holds her stomach, leaving the young man completely confused. He then closes his eyes and seems a bit uncomfortable with the woman's strange reaction. With her hand on her chest, she wonders if this is some kind of resonance phenomenon. Our hero then confirms her suspicion while scratching the back of his neck, a bit embarrassed. He adds that if she plays her cards right, she might even get a set bonus. The young man then apologizes for not being able to give her the item but offers a snack instead. With a serious look, the young blacksmith seems to be up to something with the dean. Then, a red energy explodes and the woman activates her unique skill, Soul Furnace. Eating the snack he gave her, the woman comments that the taste is very good, and he is surprised. The dean then compares the ore's flavor to that of fried tempura pieces to explain better. Our protagonist finds the compliment generous and wonders if he's getting used to her palate. Thinking this is a good way to increase affinity, he says he's glad she liked it. However, the red-haired woman laments having to eat that with the real materials in front of her. She then questions him about when he plans to process the other rare items he has saved. The young blacksmith replies that he's not selling now, and she asks if the problem is the price offered. With a smile, he explains that he's saving it for the subjugation class because hunger is the best spice. He promises that when he has an item worthy of her, she will be the first to know, and she accepts the promise. The young man then asks if today's session is over, and she nods in confirmation. She tells him not to worry, as the staff will clean everything up, and he is very relieved by this. Suddenly, our hero feels dizzy and realizes he is completely out of energy. Unable to hold himself up, he faints from exhaustion and ends up falling to the ground with the dean. Worried about the sudden fall, the woman asks if our protagonist is feeling well. With a smile, he replies that he is and says he just mismanaged his stamina during the process. She then offers to take him back to the dormitory and asks if he's afraid of heights. With a slightly mischievous smile on his face, the young man denies being afraid of high places. He then suddenly picks her up in his arms and tells her to hold on because they are leaving. The young blacksmith then jumps out the window with the dean in his arms, using fire propulsion. Surprised, she thinks it's incredible that the mold she ate gave her so much power. With a smile, he thinks that in many ways, things are very different from his past life. Meanwhile, on a rooftop, Inu watches the two fly by and reflects on the events. Later, the young woman waits outside, wondering why our hero hasn't appeared yet. Then, a post on the Academy's forum shows the girl waiting for 3 hours, and no one understands. In the comments, someone suggests she's waiting for Lee Si-hoon, but others think the idea is silly. In his room, the protagonist sees the post on his phone and is completely confused by the situation. He then thinks that if it's something important, the girl will eventually look for him again another time. Suddenly, a new instructor enters the room and introduces himself to the class as Ricardo Miles. The man warns that the last one to arrive at the training center will have to run 20 laps around the track. With that, the students run out of the classroom in a panic over the surprise run that was announced. Our hero is confused by the situation because he thought it was a theory class. With no time to think, one of his classmates just shouts for him to run without asking questions. The young blacksmith then starts running through the academy's corridors after the other students. As expected, he arrives last, and the instructor tells him to run the promised 20 laps. With a tired sigh, the young man prepares to start running his punishment laps. As he runs, he thinks that his stamina is horrible and wonders if he will be able to smelt the ore. After the run, Instructor Ricardo calls for everyone's attention to start the real class. He explains that the class, which was supposed to be theory, was changed because of the fire sword hunts. These are the fire sword hunters who pursue blacksmiths that forge fire weapons. Our protagonist thinks that in the end, the only defense left is his own body and continues on. Therefore, the instructor says that in class, they will learn to protect themselves, and the students agree. Today's topic will be swords, and our hero, collapsed on the floor, thinks he needs to be careful. To achieve this, the young man knows he first needs to increase his stamina somehow. He then looks at the bracelet on his wrist and thinks the item's performance is quite solid. The bracelet absorbs mana and increases in weight, in addition to having the skill to manipulate gravity. His stats have increased by an average of 5 points, and he vows to get his body in good shape before the year is over. Tired on the floor, the instructor shouts for our protagonist to stop running and come closer. Lying on his back, the young man activates the Ring of Burst ability to recover his strength. The master is surprised because, contrary to what he expected, the young man seems to be fine. With a sword in hand, he asks the young man to show what he knows to see if he has a knack for it. Our hero finds it difficult to move because the heavy stone bracelet gets in his way. Even without a good technique, he wonders if he should use what he was thinking of before. Then, with a quick move, he attacks his instructor with the sword for the test. His classmates notice that he is slow but think his fighting stance is decent. But the instructor thinks the stance is excellent because the young man's sword knows the way. However, the older man realizes that despite his talent, the young man is too hasty. He then prepares to counterattack and point out the flaw in his student's technique. Suddenly, our protagonist's eyes glow, and he seems to sense the danger. The instructor is shocked by what he sees and stops his attack immediately, not understanding. A vision shows that if he had attacked, the young man's sword would have hit him right in the face. The instructor is startled because if he had attacked, he would have been struck squarely by the blade. With the sword at the man's neck, our hero stares at him without even blinking for a second. The master wonders if he was so intimidated by a rookie that he had an illusion. Sweating nervously, the older man questions him about where he learned to fight with swords. With a sheepish smile, the young man says it was a technique he invented in 10 minutes. In a memory, he was trying to collect a debt from an old man who had no money. The man offered a technique instead of money for our protagonist to stop collecting. But the young man lies, saying he just watched videos of heroes fighting, and the master is confused. With a smile, Rikuros asks if the young blacksmith intends to learn how to fight. He then writes a letter of recommendation for the physical control class for the young man. With the letter in hand, our protagonist has a very serious expression on his face. Arriving at the location, he sees a man yelling at a blonde, saying he has nothing to teach. This is Ma Guangsu, a retired S-rank hero and a client of our hero in the past. The young man is shocked because the gambling-addicted old man who owed him was actually a professor. He enters the room and introduces himself, saying he came with a recommendation from Professor Rikuros. The master gets annoyed upon hearing the name, and the blonde warns that he is the top student of Borsippa. However, the older man doesn't seem impressed and thinks he doesn't look like much. He then asks the blonde young man if he really wants to learn from him, and the young man confirms. With a smile, the master says he will accept him as a student if he can defeat our hero. The rule is simple: a match where the first to land an effective blow will be the winner. The master raises his arm and gives the signal for the confrontation between the two to begin. With the man's permission, the blonde young man charges straight at our protagonist. But Lee Si-hoon just calmly holds his wooden sword, waiting for the rival's attack. The professor analyzes and wonders if that is the relaxation that maximizes the body's flexibility. With that, the blonde young man prepares to attack with a direct blow to win the fight. The master complains that he hates know-it-alls who use mind games even before a real fight. Without difficulty, our hero manages to dodge the blow by ducking at the last second. He then moves behind his opponent and grabs him tightly for the counterattack. The young blacksmith is surprised by the rival's strength as he tries to immobilize him there. But using a throwing technique, he throws the opponent over his shoulder with all his might. At that moment, the bracelet on his wrist glows and the Ring of Burst skill is activated. A blue energy envelopes his arm as he uses the item's power to save himself. With the power of the explosion, he reverses the movement and throws his opponent to the ground with force. Even with the victory, the young man feels the impact of the fall and lets out a groan of pain on the ground. His opponent lies on the ground, completely defeated after the blow he just took. With a look of defeat, the blonde young man becomes unconscious, unable to move anymore. With a victorious smile, our protagonist asks if he wasn't a little faster. The blonde kneels and comments on the attack while the master watches the scene in silence. The professor then tells everyone to leave, and the young man remembers he promised to teach him if he won. With a smile, our hero says that since he was hit, maybe the master should learn from him. The master scoffs that the top student of Aculf got beaten by a cadet from Borsippa. He then says he at least needs to make sure the blonde can fend for himself in life. With a smile, the blonde young man is happy because the master accepted him as his student in the end. He bows in gratitude, and the older man tells him to leave if they are done. But our protagonist says he has something to say in private to the older man. Alone, the master asks the young man to show him the sword technique he used the other day. With a focused look, Lee Si-hoon prepares to show his skill to the master. Wielding the wooden sword, he charges straight at the older man. But the master stops the blow with his bare hand and shatters the sword into several pieces. Our hero is amazed by the scene and says that was a one-hit technique. The master says the concept is good, but the execution was terrible and calls the technique weak. Annoyed, the man warns him that he would have broken his limbs if he had taught that to someone. He then promises that he will forge a body suitable for the young man's basic technique. With that, the young blacksmith asks if he is enrolled in the class, and the master confirms. Our protagonist says goodbye, saying that for today he is leaving the room. Alone, the master thinks that the young man is a very direct and straightforward person. Outside, the blonde young man runs and calls out to him, to our protagonist's surprise. The blacksmith stops and wonders why the other young man hasn't left the place yet. The blonde then hands him a black envelope and says he has something he wanted to give him. Our hero realizes it's an invitation to the noblest group and that Erica wanted to give it to him. The blonde says there are annoying people in the group, but that it would be a good opportunity for the young man. With a smile, he says that thanks to the protagonist, he can take the class, and so this is a gift. With that, our hero accepts the invitation and thanks him for the opportunity he was given. He then walks on, thinking about the courses he has enrolled in, and that he wants to take one near Borsippa. As he thinks about the options, a hand grabs him from behind, interrupting his thoughts. A red-haired girl then asks for his attention, and our protagonist is surprised by the approach. The young blacksmith's eyes widen, not understanding what is happening there. The girl then points to the bracelet on his wrist and asks if he made it himself. With a serious look, he holds her hand and asks what the problem would be if he did. With a smile, she offers to enchant the item, and a bond is formed with Lee Claudel. This is Lee Claudel, a genius who created legendary armaments and raised the level of enchantments. The young woman who revolutionized the enchantment industry is shocked by the bracelet's rare ore. In a cafe, she analyzes the item and wonders if she should add some formulas to it. She panics and our hero finds her eccentric as he asks if the item isn't good. The girl explains that the problem is that there are too many things she wants to do with the item. She complains that there are too many formulas and she doesn't know which one to choose, and the young man says it's okay. Confused, she doesn't understand, but our protagonist calms her down, saying he has more of that. He adds that there is a resonance phenomenon, and the girl gets very excited. Suddenly, another man arrives and asks what Lee Si-hoon's true identity is. Lee introduces herself and says he is the top first-year student, leaving him impressed. The man asks the protagonist to follow him because he has something important to tell him. Lee gets annoyed and says she was talking first, as she recognizes the young man as Erica's servant. Our hero then tells the man to just say what he wants right there so as not to waste time. The newcomer then demands an apology for disrespecting young Erica. Calmly, the blacksmith replies that it was the girl herself who told him to tear up that invitation. The subordinate thinks that makes sense, but he also received an invitation from another noble. Our protagonist then questions him if it was Erica who sent him there to bother him. The man says it was his own decision, and Lee seems very annoyed with the whole scene. With a smile, the girl then calls him a liar and says that's a load of nonsense. A memory shows the young man serving a young master, and she says everyone already knows about it. Angered, the man releases a dark aura and says he may be a decadent, but it doesn't matter. Our hero cuts him off right away, saying that Babel is full of people much more incredible than him. With an air of indifference, the blacksmith just asks if that's really the case. He then asks if the man is talking about himself as his shadow grows larger. The subordinate yells at him to shut up as an energy hand attacks him with full force. Unfazed, our protagonist just extends his hand towards the approaching attack. A blue energy then creates a dragon that stops the blow, and Lee screams very scared by the scene. The attack disperses, and he understands it wasn't just mana, but a dagger as a medium for the attack. The man is shocked by the scene and wonders how our hero managed to do that. Holding a type of ribbon, the young man just replies very casually to his opponent. With a smile, he notices the delicious sound and activates his special ability, Gluttonous Iron. He thinks that with a taste like that, his eyes could even roll back from so much power. The system screen shows that the Gluttonous Iron is of high quality and consumes other metals. Next, the young man uses the Ring of Burst skill for a surprise attack against his opponent. The subordinate is then hit squarely and lets out a sound of pain from the impact of the blow. With that, the man falls to the ground, completely defeated as the blacksmith watches him. Lee then brings his attention back to the conversation they were having before. He questions her about any lectures she can recommend from the enchantment department. The red-haired girl blinks in surprise at the request and seems to think of a good recommendation. She then recommends the ancient enchantment class and brags about having an incredible upperclassman there. Meanwhile, the subordinate walks away, holding his stomach and cursing the freshman who defeated him. Suddenly, Erica appears and asks to take a look at the dagger the man used against our hero. The man is shocked by her appearance and wonders how long she had been standing there. Without questioning, the young man hands the dagger to the black-haired young woman with great respect. She says he doesn't need to report this, and that she will speak to the head of the family herself. The girl realizes that, as expected, the item has an anti-theft enchantment engraved on it. She wonders if he created a neutralization skill based on her and the professor's sorcery. With that, she decides she will raise his evaluation to S rank in forging and A rank in sorcery. In his room, our hero receives a notification of an established affinity with Erica Inu. With a smile, he wonders if the girl saw him fighting with her subordinate earlier. He thinks the daggers were worth it and that even though they were rude, they will be very useful. In class, the young man complains that he had high hopes but is stuck listening to theories he already knows. The professor then says that the explanation was enough and they can start the real class. He explains that the shape of the metal changes depending on how you modify the mana arrangement. With that, the application of these structural changes is what determines the weapon's versatility. The master says that's why a true blacksmith must understand the full potential of the metal. And to succeed, he needs to have perfect mastery of the potential within the metal he handles. The master then announces that today they will practice metal deformation using iron ingots. The task is to create a 3-centimeter groove and then restore the item to its original state. Our hero realizes that the master doesn't reject the Magitech forging method and gives them 10 minutes. As soon as the class starts, the students complain that the metal won't return to normal and despair. But our protagonist and his rival hands place their hands on the ore to begin. With a small explosion of energy, the two announce they have finished at the same time. The professor then seems satisfied and tells the two to move on to the next phase of the test. He shows an example arrangement and asks the two to apply it to their own ores. With a smile, Hans thinks they are tied and that this time he can beat his rival. The master then shows a new, much more complex arrangement for the final test of the two. With a dark aura in his hand, the blonde young man begins to work and feels very confident. 9:39. He then finishes the work and with a smile thinks that anyone can see it's perfect. With a serious expression, the professor then calls the blonde young man's name, Hans Warmouth. The master then tells Hans to try to return the ingot to its original form, but the young man is confused. As he tries, he realizes that the mana arrangement is fried and the metal shatters into several pieces. The professor explains that his processing method was flowed from the beginning, and the young man protests. With that, he reminds him that one needs perfect mastery of the metal's potential for the job. The man then explains that if the arrangement cannot be restored, the equipment becomes corrupted. This is a major variable in quality and performance, and Hans says he will remember the warning. From his seat, our protagonist wonders if his rival has noticed the major flaw in the forging process. Then, with a punch, the young blacksmith shatters his own ingot with great ease and strength. The metal then changes shape and becomes something much more fluid and with a very unique appearance. Another student is shocked by the scene and wonders if the young man just said that was enough. The professor then calls our hero by name and asks him to show the deformation one more time. With a smile, he explains that he only managed because the ingots were made for students. The master seems to accept the explanation and understands that the ingot was more sensitive than normal. But in his thoughts, he knows that the young man didn't even realize what he had actually just done. Our hero broke a formula of the legendary sacred blacksmith that hadn't been broken in decades. This formula is the fundamental challenge for all blacksmiths, known as the truth of iron. He thinks it's impossible for the rookie to have broken it, but if he breaks it again, he will be the second in history. The scene then changes and we see the sun setting on the large building of Babel Academy in the distance. With that, the master dismisses the class but asks our protagonist to wait a moment. He then hands him a rare item as an entrance gift for coming to Babel Academy. The master then explains that if the young man absorbs the essence of that item, his vermilion flame will be strengthened forever. With a smile, our protagonist gives his thanks and says that will certainly be a great help to him. Next, the older man questions if he would be interested in taking the minor course he teaches. The young man asks if he is referring to the fundamentals of armament origins, and the master is surprised. He then confirms that he is and thinks that it is one of the few classes at Babel with a giant budget. Our hero reflects, as he had never heard of that professor before his regression to the past. But now he realizes that the man is a highly regarded professor, and so he accepts the invitation. The master questions if he will be okay, as the young man is already enrolled in a few minor courses. With an air of indifference, the young man says that counting this one, it will only be 4 courses in total. The two then shake hands, and the master says he looks forward to working with him. With the touch, the system extracts affinity from the professor and creates a rare, great item for our hero. In his room, he thinks that if he can extract metal from a person, he can also forge a body. But multiple types of elemental mana clash in the body, and this is fatal for a blacksmith. However, our protagonist is different and holds the fire jade with a determined look. He knows that a mana-drained body absorbs the essence of the vermilion flame much more easily. His job as a blacksmith is to build a mana circuit in his body just for the flame. With a sweaty and red face, the young man seems to feel a lot of pain during the forging process. He is then completely engulfed by a large red flame, and an energy hammer appears. With a cry of power, the young man says he will finally forge himself, and a light explodes. The system announces that his elemental mana has been strengthened, and his stats have increased with a new skill. Tired, he thinks about spiritual forging magic, and a voice scolds him for not using the materials. With a smile, the girl says he would be a fool if he didn't take advantage of what he has on hand. Our protagonist agrees and reflects that he needs to use everything at his disposal. Alone in his room, he vows that this time he will leave no room for regrets. A new day begins, and in class, it is announced that they will put the finishing touches on the items they made. The instructor explains that today's production will dictate the trajectory of the entire first semester. With that, all the students begin to work on their projects with great dedication in the workshop. Our hero then analyzes his sword and complains that his body didn't keep up, leaving it imperfect. Even so, he knows he doesn't have the luxury of taking it easy and holds his hammer with determination. With a strike, the young man goes back to hammering the sword, which is completely enveloped in flames. He then throws the hot blade into a bucket of water to cool the weapon. Sighing, the young blacksmith analyzes the result and thinks that in the end, it didn't turn out so bad. However, he realizes he won't have time for the rest and reflects on his next actions. The young man then decides that he prefers to forge a single piece with perfection than several mediocre ones. With a clean cut, the sword passes through the stone as if it were butter, showing its quality. Suddenly, he hears a strange sound and stops what he was doing to pay more attention. A vision of a giant wave appears, and is said that this is the sound of the world coming to an end. Focused, he thinks that whenever he heard this sound, he managed to forge a masterpiece. The sword is then enveloped in a white light and becomes a much more powerful weapon. The system announces that the weapon White Light has been made, and he has acquired a new ability. The system screen shows that the sword of White Light is of superior quality and high grade. He thinks that for a standard iron weapon, it is sufficient, and another student is shocked by the difference. With a slight smile, he realizes that his skills from before his return are gradually coming back. The other students are completely demoralized, and one of them even wonders if he should give up. The next day, our protagonist meets Lee in a cafe, and she says she's surprised by the invitation. He explains that he was curious about her fundamentals, and the girl reassures him about the crowd. Seeing that they are at a remote place, the young man asks if it isn't far, and she scoffs at his question. After the walk, the two finally arrive at a hardware store, and she announces their arrival. Upon entering the store, the red-haired girl starts yelling for her grandmother, leaving the young man very confused. Suddenly, a shadow appears behind some pans, and a voice announces that it's right there. An older woman then appears and scolds the girl, saying she isn't deaf. The old lady then asks if the young man is her boyfriend, and the girl denies it immediately, all annoyed. She introduces him as the top student, and the grandmother scoffs, saying Babel has gone downhill a lot in recent years. The woman introduces herself as Helena, and our protagonist also introduces himself to the older woman. Helena complains about the work the rookies give her, and tells the two to stop dawdling in the store. The girl then shows the way to the workshop where they can finally work together. Our hero observes the place and thinks that this woman's work is much better than he expected. He then wonders why she has a shop in a place like that, and the girl analyzes a pan. Lee then shows an enchantment palette made with powders of ground mana stones. The young man is amazed by the variety and asks if her job is to restore enchantment formulas. With a smile, the young woman confirms that the young man hit the nail on the head about what she does in the workshop. She then explains that besides getting paid, she can practice her enchantments without worrying about the costs. With a magic brush, she draws an enchantment formula with a golden energy ink. The result is a complete magic circle that shines brightly on the surface of the frying pan. Our protagonist then thinks that he only went there because it seemed like she was on a losing streak. A memory shows that she was called a failure for messing up her projects in every exam. But seeing her in person, he thinks he has identified the cause of her bad luck and also the cure for it. He then realizes that her ability to concentrate completely is a talent in itself. Looking around the workshop, he is surprised by something he just found in a corner of the place. These are custom whetstones that resonate with mana matrices to give special effects. The grandmother then tells him to go ahead and use the item because his hands were already itching to use the white light. She says he can take whatever he wants, but only if he can handle the power, and he feels exploited. But he thinks that if it means using a whetstone of that caliber, then he's in. With a focused and determined look, the young blacksmith prepares to start his work in the workshop. Then, with a quick movement, he picks up a kitchen knife that was on the workbench. The older woman then questions if he is really going to use that knife for the job. He confirms and says the blade is evenly worn and belongs to someone who knows how to use it. For the whetstone, he chooses the one with the most compressed mana particles to sharpen the weapon. With precise movements, our protagonist then begins to sharpen the knife's blade on the stone. Impressed, the old lady wonders if that young man is really just a first-year student. Suddenly, Lee shouts that she has finished her work in a very scandalous and exaggerated way. She then notices her grandmother there and asks when she arrived. The older woman calls her a brat. With a smile, the girl provokes her grandmother, saying she tried to find flaws but got a lesson instead. Annoyed, the older woman tells her to shut up and gives her a hard flick on the forehead. The woman then turns to the protagonist and asks if he has finished his work. With a smile, he says that for now, that's the best he can do, but he will do better next time. The old lady then gets annoyed and throws something at them, telling the two to get out of her workshop now. The red-haired girl says her grandmother is just grumpy for no reason and calls for the young man to leave. Alone in the workshop, the older woman just observes the knife and the stone he used on the table. Suddenly, a man bursts into the workshop shouting and calls the woman Halder sister, all excited. The old lady tells him to be quiet, and the man asks where the kitchen knife is because the orders are piling up. She complains that he is a professor and wonders when he will quit the restaurant, but he defends his hobby. The man then finds the knife on the table and picks up to take back to his restaurant. But as he looks at the blade, he gets a confused expression and seems not to understand what happened. He then asks if she sharpened the knife drunk again, but the woman denies it and says it wasn't her. The old lady reveals that it was a freshman, and the man is completely shocked by what he just heard. She then repeats that a freshman who just enrolled this year was the one who sharpened the knife. The man wonders what the heck kind of boy that would be as our hero walks outside. Walking with Lee, the protagonist asks if the old lady was a former professor, and the girl confirms. The young man then questions if there is a story behind it, but she says it's nothing special. The girl explains that many professors have left the department in the last 10 years. Curious, she asks how his enchantment was, and our hero says it was good and flawless. With a smile, the young woman says it was no big deal, but he criticizes her for being closed-minded. Confused, she doesn't understand, but he says she thought of a better method and didn't use it. He then says that a creator's imagination is a weapon and a talent that she suppressed. Anguished, the young woman questions him if he thinks she doesn't do it because she doesn't know how. Our protagonist then pulls out the knife and says he has an appointment and can't be late. With that, the red-haired girl stares at the knife in his hand, not understanding anything. An analogy says that smelting is creating the stone and enchanting is sculpting its shape in water. With the knife glowing red, he says the name of the technique, which is the Crimson Lotus. Next, the blade glows white, and he calls it White Light Style. The technique is an enhancement applied not on the outside but from beneath the weapon's surface. With a serious look, the blacksmith explains that if one layer isn't enough, you just divide it. He then adds that if she does it that way, the result will be very different. With a precise throw, the young man throws the knife, which embeds itself in a stone wall with force. The weapon remains stuck in the wall with an aura of white energy flowing through its entire blade. The sharpening then flows downward, following the path of the Crimson Lotus and cuts the wall. He then says that it's not a real enchantment, but if it's Lee, she can do it. The girl becomes thoughtful, as geniuses forge their own paths even while they are still hesitating. With a flushed face, the young woman shouts, calling him a freshman, and asks to borrow the item right away. Desperate, she begs him to lend her the knife, saying she will return it as soon as she's done. Our hero agrees but tells her to take a set of whetstones along with the knife. Overjoyed, the girl thanks him and even says she loves him before running off with the new items. Alone, the young man reflects on what just happened and says goodbye to the young woman who is walking away. The system then announces that a bond with Lee has been formed, and the young man finds it funny to be young. In an arena, he thinks that he will finally meet one of the three hounds in today's showdown. Suddenly, a girl grabs him from behind, and he asks what she is doing there. With wide eyes, she replies that she is following him, and he asks if she will leave if he tells her to. The girl confirms but says she can watch from a distance, and our protagonist seems to accept this. The system screen shows his two oars, one from Erica and another from Lee, both of high quality. The two then enter the large martial arts hall to watch the ranking matches. A woman named Ranfang introduces herself and says she will be responsible for today's broadcast. She then says it's time to introduce the competitors of the big fight that is about to happen. A blonde woman appears in the middle of the arena as the first competitor of today's event. She is the top fourth-year student and the next head of the Myers family, which produces S-rank heroes. Besides being an A-rank hero, she is the champion of the martial arts hall for 3 years. With a confident look, the woman named Aria Myers is introduced to the entire audience. In the audience, a man declares his love for the champion, and our protagonist and Erica just watch. Next, a man with a spear appears in the arena as the champion's first challenger. With a slight smile on his face, our protagonist finally says that they have met. This is the rabid hound, Yam Sunga, one of the three he met in his past life. With his spear in flames, the young man charges at the champion with a very powerful attack. But with a smile, the blonde-haired woman prepares to defend against the young man's blow. Then the two clash in a great explosion of power in the battle arena. The young man then lets out a sound of pain and seems surprised by the result of the first attack. Without giving up, the young man holds his spear more tightly as the flames intensify. With a focused and bright look, the champion prepares for her rival's next move. She then creates a circle of fire to protect herself and attack the young man at the same time. The two then resume exchanging blows at an impressive speed in the middle of the arena. In the audience, our protagonist says that even though he is young, the fight is below standard. He then adds that there are several things bothering him, but the problem is his weapon. The young man then throws his spear with all his might towards the champion for a final attack. Suddenly, the weapon stops in mid-air, right in front of the woman's neck, to everyone's surprise. With the tip of the spear at his neck, the young man faces his opponent with a serious look. Without saying another word, the purple-haired young man just admits that he lost today's fight. The champion then says it was a good match and sheathes her sword back. With that, the announcer declares that the winner of the match is the champion, Aria Myers. She then says she would do an interview, but Yeom Sunga had to leave for personal reasons. The champion then comments that fighting the 9th ranked would be difficult even for her. With a smile, she offers to fill the time with questions, and the young man leaves. The protagonist realizes that the young man was upset with the result of the fight that just ended. Erica then questions if he is leaving, and the young man says he doesn't like that style. With an air of contempt, he turns and says that the champion is too full of herself and leaves. The girl doesn't understand his anger, but is relieved that he didn't come to see her brother. The champion is asked about an interesting freshman, and her gaze focuses on someone. With her blonde hair blowing in the wind, the woman stares at the person who caught her attention. In her eyes, our hero's reflection appears, and she thinks she might have found one. In a nearby park, the purple-haired young man sits alone and lets out a sigh. Our protagonist then finds him and is glad to see Yeom Sunga alive and breathing. He remembers that in the past, the young man was the pillar of the death squad and sacrificed himself. Yem questions if he was watching, and the blacksmith thinks that he hasn't gone crazy yet. The young man confirms, and the purple-haired young man is impressed that he found him there. Suddenly, he recognizes him and asks why the top cadet of Borsippa is there. Our hero is confused by the reaction and says he just hoped they could talk. But with a cold and impatient look, the purple-haired young man tells him to go away. The blacksmith tries to argue, but the young man says he hates the weak and doesn't want to talk. He adds that he hates those who think they are on his level and tells our protagonist to leave. With a serious and expressionless look, the young man says only one word, which is blacksmith. He thinks that the young man is very calm compared to his rabid hound days in the past. Our hero then realizes they won't solve this with words and prepares to act quickly. The purple-haired young man realizes he has no intention of backing down from the fight. The two then face each other, and our protagonist says he has only one thing to say. With a cold look, he warns that the legacy of the Fire Wheel Ember Spear will end there. Angered by the provocation, the rabid hound charges straight at our hero. With his fist clenched and full of energy, he prepares for a devastating punch. But the blacksmith manages to block the blow with his hand, which glows with a blue aura. The system then announces that the Iron Seeker's Karma Seal has been activated on the spot. With the impact of the blows, a large explosion of fire occurs between the two young men. The purple-haired young man is shocked that his mana-infused punch was defended like that. He thinks that the young man lives up to his title and may be qualified to speak with him. With the power of the ember in his fist, he says that this will all end right now. The two then face each other once more for a new confrontation of power and energy. Yeom Sunga releases a blast of flames, but our hero seems quite calm. Amidst the flames, the blacksmith just lets out a sigh as if nothing had happened. The rabid hound doesn't understand why the ember that only reacts to his mana is in his hand. With wide eyes, he realizes that the young man dismantled and stole his ability. Our protagonist then manipulates the flames he just stole from his opponent. With a look of contempt, he prepares to show what he can do with the power. Completely out of his mind, a purple aura explodes from the rabid hound, who has lost control. The hero thinks that the massacre of the Yahello sect was because of this temper. Furious, the rabid hound prepares a punch to end our protagonist's audacity, but the blacksmith thinks that the effect of his skill is ending, and his body has reached its limit. He then decides that creating a bond peacefully won't work, so he will have to crush him. With that, the sound of the powerful blow's impact echoes throughout the Grand Academy's courtyard. However, our hero manages to grab his rival's fist and stops the attack before being hit. Suddenly, Jake Myers appears and grabs the young man's hand, asking what was happening there. The blonde then asks if Yahello knows the top cadet of Borsippa, and he confirms. The rabid hound remains silent with a very annoyed expression on his face. With that, Jake tells him to leave, and the young man obeys as the blonde calls for Lee Si-hoon. His friend then pulls him, telling him to stop saying strange things and to go. Alone, the rabid hound thinks that he lost his mind and almost tarnished his spear's reputation. With a serious look, he seems to reflect on the confrontation he just had with the blacksmith. Far away, Jake scolds him for starting a fight and says he could have gotten hurt. With a smile, our hero says that's nonsense and there was no real danger. A screen announces that a bond has been created, and the young man thinks he only threatened him to extract his karma. He reflects that if Yahello is soft, the stone's effect might change, and he needs to strengthen the bond. The blacksmith then looks at his friend and thinks he seems very useful and asks about his hand. With a smile, the blonde says it's okay because his hand is stronger than his whole body. Our protagonist repeats that his hands are strong and says he has something more important. The blonde then asks if he said something about his sister in the arena, and the young man confirms it's Area Myers. Our hero then replies that it was nothing major, and that she's just a pain in the neck. His friend says that's why his sister took an interest in him, and asked so many questions. In a memory, the woman smiles and Jake asks him to speak more quietly because she is rank A. But the young man says her interest is good, and thinks about how to get Yahello's attention. Worried, his friend warns him not to take her lightly because she is very dangerous. The blacksmith interrupts him and asks if his sister is petty and treacherous with others. Sheepishly, the blonde young man stutters and says he wouldn't go that far to describe his sister. The protagonist then wonders why he dislikes the blonde-haired woman so much. In a memory of the future, he remembers that she was a sword saint, Area Myers. The woman then says that was another disappointing sword as she faces the demons. One day, the sword saint simply disappeared without leaving any notice behind, and in her place appeared the demon god of annihilating light with a demonic sword. Back in the present, the young man thinks she gives off a bad vibe just by looking at her face. With that, he says goodbye and leaves, leaving his new colleague completely alone. The blonde young man stands there, not understanding anything, and wonders what just happened. Suddenly, his phone rings, and the young man is startled by the unexpected call he received. A message from his sister asks him to tell her everything about his new friend. His phone then starts to ring, and the young man is terrified by the call he received. An image shows the woman with a snake and says his sister is asking him for a favor. Far away, the protagonist walks alone and lets out a sigh of frustration into the air. The next morning in the Babel Academy classroom, our protagonist wonders if he was too hard on Yahello. Suddenly, a small professor enters the room in a strange vehicle and gets all the students' attention. He introduces himself as Reese Doba and says he will be teaching attribute smelting for 2 weeks. The master then announces that he will hand out the evaluations and each person's budget before class. With a sheet in hand, he prepares to announce the name of the last student on the roll call list. The professor then calls for Lee Si-hoon, and a rival thinks he should be getting much more than him. But the man announces that our hero's budget hasn't been released yet, leaving the young man confused. The master explains that the quality of his item was so high that it went to a second-year auction. With that, his budget will be based on the winning bid, and the young man suspects the vice director. But he thinks that if it were a problem, his other professor would have stopped it, and he accepts the situation. The man then starts the class on residual mana and says a cadet will be assisting in the class. To everyone's surprise, Yahello enters the room as the class's temporary assistant. One of the students is shocked and wonders why that upperclassman would be in a class like this. The professor then says that's enough with the introductions and they will start with the concepts. He explains that in weapon creation, residual mana is divided into 2 main categories. The first is basic charging, and the second is the much more difficult independent type. This is because the method of constructing the mana core doesn't really follow a standard. Therefore, all students will start with the charging type, and the master calls his assistant. Yahello then shows his power, and a large fire aura immediately envelopes his hand. The professor explains that fire mana is volatile, but if suppressed, it shows great power. An example of this is the Fire Wheel Ember Spear technique, which the assistant demonstrates. Hans is shocked because even he has difficulty controlling the workshop's furnace. The professor tells them to take the chance and gives them the assignment for next Thursday. The topic of the assignment will be the fire wheel with residual mana of the attribute charging type. With that, the master tells everyone to hurry and go to the foundry room. One of the students then thinks that this is his big chance to get closer to the upperclassmen. With a smile, Hans approaches to greet the assistant and introduce himself. But the purple-haired young man cuts him off right away and tells the young man to get out of his sight. Hans then feels like complete trash for being dismissed like that by the upperclassmen. Suddenly, the assistant calls our protagonist's name, who is already leaving the room. The upperclassman then asks what exactly our hero knows about him and his powers. The blacksmith explains that the mastery of the spear is measured by the number of fire wheels created. He adds that based on his ease earlier, the upperclassman could easily maintain about 6. Confused by the statement, the purple-haired young man runs after the blacksmith to confront him. Our hero then shocks him by revealing that he knows he had reached the 7th wheel before, and that one day he could no longer maintain the power, leaving him stunned by the information. The young man says he has a talent with fire and that upon seeing his flames, something seemed off. It was as if he wasn't releasing his power, and just letting it disappear into the air without a fight. Desperate, the rabbit hound then asks him if he knows what the cause of the problem is. With a serious look, our protagonist replies that he has a hunch about the situation. The blacksmith says he has a hunch, but he doesn't feel the need to tell him. With little choice, the purple-haired young man tells him to just say what he wants in return. With a smile, our hero says that first, he must pay a fair price for his help. The second condition is that if he faces a difficult decision, he must consult him first. He then gives the young man a deadline to decide before they reach the foundry room. With a drop of sweat on his face, the rabbit hound accepts the deal proposed by the blacksmith, but he adds that our protagonist will need to show proof first. Later, in the academy's forge room, all the students prepare for the new assignment. His classmates wonder if he will forge without a blueprint and without needing verification. He then mixes a fire ore with a dark ore in a 7:3 ratio. Another student is shocked by the scene and thinks the top student is doing something strange. The plan is to apply heat until the elemental mana of each of the ores starts to leak out. Next, the young man adjusts his gloves and prepares for the next step of his work. This technique is called thermal displacement and adjusts the flames and mana at the same time. The professor is impressed and understands why they accepted his item at the public auction. With a smile, the blacksmith thinks that Sunga is seeing something very different from the others. He then tells the purple-haired young man to watch everything very carefully. With his foot, our protagonist presses a pedal to increase the intensity of the flames. The technique maintains the balance of the opposing manas and allows them to form a circle. The professor and the rabbit hound just watch the scene and seem to understand the whole process. The rabbit hound understands that his secondary attribute mana was interfering with his ember spear. Shocked by the revelation, he realizes that's why his power dropped to the 5th wheel. Later, he explains that even with 5 black flame wheels, they are stronger than 7. The upperclassman then reveals that his sect sends an instructor to check on his skills, and if by any chance he drops to a level below the 6th wheel, he will lose his status as successor. Our hero suggests using the old method, but the young man says that won't work either. He explains that he can no longer control the dark attribute mana and has lost the power. The blacksmith then asks when the instructor arrives, and the upperclassman replies that it will be tomorrow. Worried, the young man thinks of a method that can be used in just a single day. With an idea in mind, our protagonist approaches and places a hand on his colleague's shoulder. He then questions if he would do anything to protect his position, and the other confirms. With a satisfied smile on his face, the young blacksmith says that's enough. The system screen shows that the ore created from the bond unites fire and darkness. Holding the item, our hero says the first thing to do is change his weapon. In a training room, the upperclassman brags that only the best can use the facility. He then offers to change the room's appearance and adjusts it with a control panel. With that, the room's scenery transforms into a replica of the Manhwa sect for training. The protagonist teases him, asking if he's homesick, but the upperclassman brushes it off. With the ore in hand, the young man says they will start by creating the training tool. He then begins to crush the powerful ore with his own hands for the job. The screen shows the black stone, a crimson resonance of advanced and very high quality. With that, the blacksmith attaches the stone to the spear shaft and says the job is done. The upperclassman finds it strange to use 2 spears but understands it's better for using 2 attributes. Our hero then tells him to create a wheel of flames with his left hand and dark mana with his right. Without hesitation, the purple-haired young man begins to train with both spears at the same time. But suddenly, he feels the mana explode and the power goes completely out of his control. Confused, he asks what that was, and the blacksmith explains that he used dark mana by accident. The young man says it's normal for the manas to mix, but in his case, they interfere with each other. With a smile, he places a bracelet on the upperclassman and says that reaching the 6th wheel will be easy. The purple-haired young man comments that the equipment is good and continues his training with more enthusiasm. 3 hours later, the rabbit hound is still training with both manas very intensely. Our protagonist thinks he adapts quickly because the training was created by his future self. With that, the blacksmith carefully observes his movements and his breathing pattern. He also analyzes the way mana circulates through his body and exits through the tip of the spear. The upperclassman questions why he is staring at him, and the young man says he is collecting data for a weapon. Surprised by the answer, the purple-haired young man listens to the blacksmith very attentively. The protagonist says the weapon is for an assignment, so he shouldn't get his hopes up too high. Next, the young blacksmith suddenly changes the subject and starts talking about something else. He then questions if there is a reason he has to maintain his position as successor. With a serious look, the young man replies that his master wants him to become the leader of the sect. He explains that as a disciple, he just loyally follows his master's will. We then find out that the rabbit hound was an orphan and was adopted by the S-rank hero Jin Hyan. Even though retired due injury, his master and father has an absolute influence over the young man. With that, their bond rises to level 3 and our hero is satisfied with the progress. The upperclassman then turns to him and asks why he is helping him so much with everything. Our protagonist remains silent for a moment before revealing his grand plan. An image shows the 6 great demonic realms filled with beasts and dangers. He then says that to enter there, he needs people to protect him and materials for weapons. With a gesture, he says the next leader of the sect should have skill and also money. The rabid hound calls him a materialist, but the blacksmith asks if he was expecting charity. The purple-haired young man then asks if the young man wanted a price for his great help. He says that if our hero helps him become the leader, he will accompany him into the demonic realms. With conviction, he promises that if the blacksmith makes the weapon, he will take down the demon gods. With a satisfied smile on his face, our protagonist seems to have liked the proposal. The upperclassman then questions if he won't regret making that deal later. The blacksmith says he will make him the leader of the sect even if he hates the idea right now. The system then announces that the karma seal of the black stone has finally been activated. The next day, at a public training ground, the veteran's evaluation is finally about to begin. Just then, a man named Kang Hyun-woon, an instructor from the Manhwa sect, arrives for the test. He explains that the sect leader sent him there to test the young master with a few disciples. One of the disciples starts sucking up to the instructor, calling him the most promising candidate for leader. With a cold stare, Mad Dog scolds him, saying that the next leader hasn't been decided. Embarrassed, the man apologizes, saying he got a little carried away. The instructor then asks if they can begin the test, but the veteran immediately refuses. With a circle of fire, he says he's going to sign up for the ascension of the 7th wheel, shocking everyone. In a flashback, the sect leader gave the instructor full permission to act without hesitation. The man warns him that for the 7th wheel, he'll have to fight a master, and that it's too soon. Our hero then taunts him, and the irritated instructor calls for his spear for a duel of power. This duel is a test of power where the stronger one wins, and even a tie guarantees the promotion. Mad Dog then prepares for the fight and draws his new double-bladed spear. With a contemptuous smile, his opponent scoffs at the weapon and calls it crude. Unfazed, the purple-haired young man attacks with everything he's got, using his dark flames. The instructor is shocked and accuses him of using dark magic, saying his flames are chaotic. But with 6 wheels of fire and darkness, he says the man will know the outcome when they fight. Annoyed by his audacity, the instructor says he'll regret it and charges forward to attack. Then, the 2 spears clash in a massive explosion of power and flames in the arena. Wide-eyed, the older man is stunned by his opponent's power. The instructor despairs as he watches his flame dragon get completely devoured by his rival's power. Next, the man's own spear begins to crack under the pressure of the incoming attack. Unable to withstand the power, the instructor's weapon shatters into pieces right in front of him. With that, the man falls to his knees, completely defeated and without his power weapon. Mad Dog then stands tall with the spear on his shoulder and calls the fight crude in the end. Our hero asks what's next, and the veteran says he will become a master and successor. Then the blacksmith asks him how people become leaders of the sect, and he answers. The veteran explains that first, one must reach 8 wheels and then get the master's approval. The young man says he can get approval by fighting, but that it won't be as easy as today's match. With a smile, our protagonist states that it won't take long and that today's result is proof. The young blacksmith then warns that his friend should be worried about how he's going to pay for this. Mad Dog agrees and says he'll get money or materials as payment. With that, our hero says he has one more request, and the veteran is surprised by his words. The purple-haired young man holds the temporary weapon and thinks it's not bad for a class assignment. He then wonders what kind of spear the blacksmith will make if he made that in just a few hours. As they walk, Mad Dog asks for a more practical weapon and points the spear at his friend. A system screen then announces that the affinity level with Yeom Sunga has risen to 2. Their relationship is one of exchange, and an affinity stone is created with every closed deal. The scene then changes, and we are taken to a large and luxurious auction house at the academy. The auctioneer announces the start of the regular auction for the second-year refinement students. In the auction audience, a young man comments on the large number of participants that night. He thinks it must be hard for his rivals to oppose him with everyone watching. A man in a suit then explains that the theme is Iron Swords of the Quality Inspection. He displays a silk cloth made from the hide of a white tiger, a demonic beast. With that, an assistant tries to cut the cloth, but the sword he uses breaks instantly. The impact is so strong that the blade shatters into several pieces in front of everyone. The auctioneer explains that the golden silk will be used to identify inferior weapons. Then, the first item of the auction is present Kadet Gate Joseph's blade for the test. The young man in the audience thinks it will be interesting, as the person in charge seems well prepared. The woman explains that the white tiger's fur can mimic a metal aura and weaken weapons. She thinks the white light sword is at a disadvantage because cutting weapons have low durability. The young man confirms her suspicion and says that this is a trap for him and for Professor Kim. With a smile, he says that will only happen if the weapon wasn't made correctly. Finally, our protagonist's sword number 36 is called up for the test. The weapon then glows with an intense blue light and prepares for the great cutting test. The blade's energy flows through its entire body and concentrates for the powerful strike. The assistant then swings the sword with all his might towards the tough silk cloth. The man who set the trap for the young man is completely shocked by the scene he's witnessing. To everyone's surprise, the sword cuts the cloth in half and remains still, without a single scratch.